The shocking betrayal. The club's bass vibrated through the soles of her shoes as Lily's frustration simmered. She took another sip of her drink, the amber liquid sharp and biting, though it did little to dull the edge that had settled over her. Max's absence weighed heavily on her. It wasn't just his late arrival tonight. It was the constant pattern of him showing up when it suited him and leaving her to pick up the pieces. Tonight had been meant to be different, a night to escape, to feel something real. Instead, it was unraveling into yet another disappointment. Her phone buzzed again, but she barely glanced at it. Another text from Max. "On my way. Don't start drama." The words were a familiar refrain, each syllable dripping with an overconfidence that grated on her nerves. Max had been the life of the party when they first met, his charm and easy smile pulling her in like a moth to a flame. He had promised her adventure, spontaneity, and freedom from the confines of her life. But as time went on, she began to see the cracks beneath the surface, the selfishness, the arrogance, the inability to show up when it mattered. She had given him chance after chance, clinging to the hope that the man she'd once fallen for would return. But each time he failed, each time he chose his own desires over their plans, she felt that hope fade just a little more. Max had always been the center of attention, whether he was at a private party or in a high-end club like this one. His charisma was magnetic, and people gravitated toward him. Lily had initially been drawn to that energy, but tonight, the spotlight seemed to only highlight how little he cared for her feelings. She could almost feel the weight of the club's atmosphere pressing down on her chest as she stared at her phone in silent anger. Just then, the crowd parted slightly, and there he was, stepping into view. Max Westbrook, casually confident in his signature designer jacket, tousled blonde hair artfully messy, a smile on his face, as if he hadn't just left her waiting for hours. The tension that had been building inside her burst to the surface. Finally decided to show up. Lily snapped, her voice sharp, cutting through the noise around them. Max smirked and slid a hand around her waist as if nothing was wrong, his fingers brushing her skin in a way that used to send a thrill down her spine. But tonight, it only irritated her further. She pulled away from his touch with a barely contained flare of frustration. "Relax, Lil," he said, his tone condescending. "It's barely midnight. I'm here now. Let's enjoy ourselves." She could feel her pulse quickening, but it wasn't with excitement, it was irritation. Everything about him tonight was grating. The casualness of his smile, the ease with which he spoke, as if they hadn't just made plans that he had completely disregarded. "You said we'd have dinner, Max," she said, her voice tight, barely able to hold back the frustration. "That was 3 hours ago. You couldn't even show up on time for a simple dinner." Max's expression faltered for just a moment, the flicker of guilt crossing his features before he masked it with a shrug. "You know how things are, Lil. Work, meetings, last-minute things. You should know by now that I can't always stick to plans. But you look gorgeous as always, so let's not ruin the night, yeah?" The words stung, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Was he really this oblivious, this selfish? Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she fought the urge to lash out. "Don't patronize me, Max," she said through gritted teeth. "This isn't the first time you've done this. You keep making excuses, and I keep forgiving you. But I'm done this time." Max stepped back slightly, his face flickering with surprise, as if he hadn't expected this kind of response. He studied her for a moment, his cool, calculating gaze scanning her, as if trying to figure out his next move. But it didn't take long before the faintest trace of annoyance crossed his face. "Lil, come on. This is ridiculous," he said, his voice taking on a colder, more dismissive tone. "You know how my life works. You knew this when we started this thing. I can't be at your beck and call every minute of the day. You're the one who's making this a big deal." Her heart pounded in her chest as the words spilled out before she could stop them. "Yeah, I knew what I was getting into, Max. I thought you were different. But I was wrong. You're just another man who thinks he can have it all, and treat everyone around him like they don't matter. Well, I'm not one of your toys to be played with whenever you feel like it. The moment the words left her mouth, she saw his demeanor change. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made her pause. But it wasn't regret. It was a hint of anger. His jaw tightened, and he took a step closer, his voice low and cold. "You're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be," he said, his words deliberately slow and measured. "I'm here now. Let's not ruin the night, okay?" Lily shook her head, her vision blurring with a mix of emotions that washed over her. Disappointment, frustration, anger, none of it felt new. But for some reason, tonight, it was all amplified. Max had promised her excitement, but instead, he had delivered disappointment. "No," she said firmly, her voice rising with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "I'm done. I'm done making excuses for you, and I'm done letting you treat me like I'm not worth your time." Max's expression hardened, and for a moment, he looked almost incredulous. His lips curled into a sarcastic smile, as if to mock her. "You really think you can just walk away from this?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think I need you? I could have anyone I want." Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the words were already spilling out. "You think I care who you could have? Max, I'm not here for your games. I'm not here to be part of your ego trip. You're nothing but a man who can't keep his promises." Without another word, Lily turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor with a sense of finality that echoed in the empty space between them. Max didn't try to stop her this time. Instead, he stood there, watching her leave, his pride wounded, his arrogance only growing as she vanished into the crowd. But even as she walked away, something in her shifted. She had finally seen the truth of who he was. It wasn't about his charm or his promises anymore. It was about the realization that she deserved better. She deserved someone who would show up, someone who would care, someone who would be there when it mattered. As she stepped outside the club, the cold night air hit her like a slap in the face. But she didn't flinch. The city around her buzzed with life, but she felt strangely alone, as though she had stepped into a world where only she and her thoughts existed. The reality of the situation was slowly settling in. She was done with Max. She was done with the lies. Done with the games. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking control of her own life. And Max was no longer the man she had fallen for. He was nothing more than a lesson learned. The unexpected turn. Lily's heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement as she walked down the dimly lit street, the weight of the evening's events still settling over her like a thick fog. The crisp air cut through her, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the club she had just left behind. Her breath came in slow, deliberate inhales as she tried to regain control of the emotions that had boiled over inside her. She could still hear Max's voice echoing in her mind, the arrogance in his words lingering like a bad taste in her mouth. She turned a corner, her thoughts racing. The city around her was alive, but she felt like she was floating, detached from everything. It was as though the reality of what had just happened hadn't fully hit her yet. She had ended things with Max, finally, but it didn't feel as liberating as she had imagined. In fact, it felt hollow. She had invested so much of herself into him, believing that somehow things would change, that he would change. But now that it was over, there was an emptiness where hope had once been. Lily pulled her phone from her bag, the screen lighting up with a message. She half expected it to be from Max. Another plea, another attempt to manipulate the situation and make her feel like she was overreacting. But when she saw the name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was from Rachel, her best friend, who had been trying to get in touch with her all evening. "Where are you? I've been trying to call you. Are you okay?" Lily paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen as she debated how to respond. Rachel had always been there for her, a constant source of support, and she couldn't deny the sense of comfort that came from knowing someone truly cared about her well-being. The last thing she wanted was to worry her friend, but she also didn't want to have another conversation about Max. Not yet. She quickly typed out a reply, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. I'm fine. Just needed some space. I'll be home soon. It wasn't a lie. She did need space, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't fine. Not really. She hit send and shoved the phone back into her bag. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the sidewalk as Lily continued to walk, her pace slow but deliberate. As she approached the corner, she caught sight of a familiar figure standing by the entrance to a small cafe. A man she hadn't seen in years, a man she had hoped she'd never see again. Jason. Her heart skipped a beat, the unexpected appearance of the one person she never thought she'd run into so suddenly throwing her off balance. Jason was a blast from the past, a chapter in her life she tried to close, but one that had never fully disappeared. He was the one who had hurt her the most, the one who had shattered her trust in the most brutal way possible. She had thought he was a friend, someone she could rely on, but in the end, he had betrayed her. He had lied to her, used her, and then disappeared without so much as a word of explanation. That was the last time she'd let anyone close enough to break her. Yet here he was, standing right in front of her, as if nothing had changed. His deep brown eyes, always full of mischief, locked onto hers as soon as he saw her. "Lily," he said softly, his voice a mix of surprise and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "It's been a long time." She stopped in her tracks, her mind racing. Her stomach churned with a cocktail of emotions. Anger, disbelief, and confusion. Why was he here? What did he want? Jason stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, as though trying to make himself seem less intimidating. But the weight of their past hung between them, an unspoken tension that neither could ignore. "What do you want, Jason?" Lily's voice was cool, guarded. She had no patience for small talk, not tonight, not with him. He raised an eyebrow, as if he wasn't sure how to respond to the sharpness in her tone. "I was hoping we could talk," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I know I messed up, Lily. I've tried to reach out before, but you've always shut me out. I get it, but I don't think I can just leave things the way they are." Lily's heart clenched at his words, though not in the way he likely hoped. He was here, asking for forgiveness, as though that would be enough to heal the wounds he'd left behind. But it wasn't enough, not even close. She crossed her arms over her chest, forcing herself to take a deep breath. "You don't get it, Jason. You don't get to come back into my life and expect everything to be fine. You hurt me. You broke my trust, and you've had years to apologize for it. You think a few words are going to fix that?" Jason flinched, his face faltering for just a moment before he regained his composure. He stepped a little closer, his eyes searching hers, looking for any sign that she was willing to hear him out. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Lily," he said, his voice lower now, tinged with regret. "I just want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I've thought about you every single day since I left. I'd done a lot of things I'm not proud of, but losing you, that was the worst thing I've ever done." Lily felt a sharp pang in her chest at his words, but she quickly pushed it down. She wasn't ready to fall for this again. She wasn't ready to let someone back into her life who had shown her nothing but pain in the past. "I don't need your apology, Jason," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I've moved on from you. I've built a life without you in it, and I'm not going to let you come in and mess it all up again." Jason seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping as though he had just been struck with a heavy blow. He looked at her one last time, as if searching for something, before he nodded slowly. "I get it," he said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "I really do. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I'll always be sorry for what I did." Lily watched as he turned and walked away, the distance between them growing with each step he took. She didn't feel relief, though. There was no sense of closure, no moment of triumph. Instead, she felt a deep sadness that he couldn't or wouldn't, understand the damage he had done. As she stood there, staring at his retreating figure, Lily realized something. Jason's apology, his words, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she had taken control of her life. She had ended things with Max. She had turned her back on the past and all the people who had hurt her. And now, standing on the edge of her future, Lily knew that she was finally free. A dangerous alliance. Lily's steps were slower now, deliberate as she walked down the street. The conversation with Jason lingered in her mind, but she quickly shoved it aside. It didn't matter. Not anymore. She had a future to build, a future that didn't involve any more ghosts from her past. She had learned that over the years and tonight, more than ever, she was ready to embrace it. But there was something gnawing at the back of her mind, an unease that refused to be shaken. Jason's sudden appearance wasn't a coincidence, not by a long shot. He didn't just show up out of nowhere after years of silence. He had to have known she was in town, had to have heard about her life, about her decisions. That meant someone was watching her. Someone had been keeping track of her movements. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's urgent. I know what you're thinking, and I can help you." Lily's heart skipped a beat. There was no name, no context, just those cryptic words. She stared at the message for several seconds, her thumb hovering over the screen, uncertain about how to respond, or if she should respond at all. Another buzz. "Trust me, Lily. I'm the only one who can keep you safe, and I know exactly what you're dealing with." Her fingers trembled as she typed a response, skepticism clouding her mind. She didn't trust easily, not anymore. Max, Jason, everyone in her life, up until now, had given her plenty of reasons to doubt the intentions of others. But there was something in this message that tugged at her, something that felt familiar. "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately, the words sending a chill down her spine. "I'm someone you've met before, someone you thought you'd never see again. Don't ignore this. It's too dangerous." Lily's heart began to race. Her mind immediately went to a dark place. Could it be Max? No, he wouldn't be this subtle. This felt like something deeper, something more insidious. Could it be Jason again, trying to worm his way back into her life? Her thoughts swirled like a storm. But one thing was clear. She had to meet this person. Whoever they were, they knew too much. Without giving it another thought, she typed a quick reply. "Where?" The message came swiftly. "The old warehouse on 5th and Oak. Midnight. Come alone." The finality of the message left no room for hesitation. Her stomach twisted with anxiety, but there was also a part of her, a small but insistent part, that was intrigued. Her curiosity had always been her weakness. She couldn't ignore this. Not with everything that had been happening in her life. Lily glanced around. The streets were still bustling, the glow of neon signs casting long shadows on the pavement. She stood for a moment, unsure of what to do. She could turn back, go home, and try to forget all about this strange message. But deep down, she knew that wouldn't be enough. If there was something she needed to hear, something that could answer the questions that had been haunting her, then she had to face it. She checked the time on her phone. It was almost 11:30 p.m. The thought of going alone made her uneasy, but there was no time to waste. The longer she waited, the more the uncertainty grew. She would have to be careful, stay alert, and trust no one. It was the only way to survive this. She hailed a cab, climbing in with resolve. The driver barely glanced at her as she gave the address. The ride felt suffocating, the silence between them oppressive. Every turn, every streetlight, every shadow that passed by the window seemed to heighten the tension in the air. Her heart raced as she neared the location. What awaited her in that dark warehouse? What did this person want from her? And why now? The cab slowed as it approached 5th and Oak. The street was deserted, the dim lights from a few nearby buildings casting pale reflections across the rain-slicked pavement. The warehouse loomed ahead, its dark silhouette like a giant predator waiting in the shadows. It had been abandoned for years, its rusted metal doors sagging in their frames, the windows long shattered. No one had dared to go near it in ages. The cab came to a stop in front of the building. Lily could barely make out the outline of the entrance, the heavy door slightly ajar. She paid the driver without a word, then stepped out of the cab, her eyes scanning the area. There was no sign of anyone waiting for her, no one in sight. The night was eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of traffic in the background. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, but she forced herself to focus. This was it. She couldn't back out now. The door beckoned, and with a deep breath, Lily walked toward it. She pushed it open, the sound of creaking metal echoing in the silent air. Inside was even darker, the shadows swallowing up the sparse light from the street outside. A voice broke the silence. "You're here." Lily froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The voice was calm, measured, but there was something about it that sent a chill through her. She strained her eyes, trying to make out the figure standing in the shadows. A man stepped forward, his face partially obscured by the dim light. But his eyes, she knew those eyes. It was him, Max. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She had thought this meeting would be about something else entirely. But now, standing in front of her, was the man who had once promised her the world and shattered it in the process. "Max," Lily said, her voice barely a whisper, a mix of disbelief and anger rising in her chest. Max's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile, but there was nothing kind about it. "I never thought you'd actually show up," he said, stepping closer. "You're much more stubborn than I gave you credit for." Lily swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had been expecting answers, but not from him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice hardening. Max's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm here because we have unfinished business, Lily. And you're going to need me if you want to survive what's coming next." The tension in the air thickened. Whatever was about to unfold, whatever danger lurked in the shadows, Lily knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The web tightens. Lily's pulse quickened as Max stepped closer, the shadows from the warehouse swallowing him up like an omen. His presence was overwhelming, and despite all the anger and frustration she felt towards him, there was an undeniable sense of danger that seemed to pulse through the air. The man standing before her was not the one she had once known. The arrogance was still there, but it had become something darker, something more sinister. "Max, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm done," Lily said, her voice steady despite the rising fear in her chest. "You can't manipulate me anymore. Whatever you want, I'm not interested." Max chuckled, the sound low and disconcerting. "Manipulate you? Lily, I'm not here to play games. I'm here to make sure you don't get caught in the mess that's about to unfold." Lily's brow furrowed, her confusion growing. "What mess? What are you talking about?" Max's eyes hardened, the playful glint vanishing. He looked past her, as if considering the weight of what he was about to say. He took a step back, his arms crossing over his chest, and for a moment, Lily saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected, a flicker of sincerity. "You don't know what you've walked into," he said quietly. "There's more at play here than you could possibly imagine. People, dangerous people, have been watching you. Watching both of us. They know what you've been doing, where you've been going, and they've been keeping track of every move you make." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to stay composed. "Who are you talking about?" Max stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "I can't say much more, but you've got enemies, Lily. People who will stop at nothing to get what they want. And trust me, they won't hesitate to hurt you if they think it'll get them closer to their goal." Lily's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words settled over her like a thick fog. She had thought the worst was behind her, that after cutting Max out of her life, things would get easier. But now, standing in this dark, abandoned warehouse, it seemed like everything she had believed about her world was a lie. "Why are you helping me?" she demanded, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "You've hurt me. You've lied to me. Why should I trust you now?" Max's gaze softened for a brief moment, and then he sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Because, Lily, I've been in the same game for longer than you realize. I've been on the inside, working for people who would rather see you gone than let you walk free. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I've seen the lengths they're willing to go to." Lily stepped back, her mind racing. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to believe that everything around her was falling apart again. But somewhere deep inside, she knew he wasn't lying. He might have hurt her, he might have betrayed her, but there was something in his eyes now, something real, that told her this was no longer about their past. It was about survival. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max's lips parted, and for a moment, it seemed like he might tell her everything. But then, just as quickly, he closed his mouth, shaking his head. "I can't tell you everything right now, Lily. Not until you understand what you're dealing with. But I can tell you this, you need to get out of here. Right now." Before she could respond, a sudden noise from the far corner of the warehouse made both of them freeze. The sound was faint, barely audible over the ambient hum of the city outside, but it was unmistakable, the faintest rustle, the softest footstep. Lily's heart raced. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Max's eyes darted to the source of the noise, his face hardening. "They found us." Without another word, Max grabbed her arm, pulling her roughly toward the back of the warehouse. She stumbled for a moment, but her instincts kicked in, and she quickly regained her footing. They hurried past old crates and boxes, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Lily's mind was spinning. She had no idea who or what Max was running from. The only thing she knew for sure was that she had no choice but to follow him. The danger felt too close now, too real. And despite everything, despite the betrayal, the anger, she needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening before it was too late. They reached the back exit, a small door barely visible in the shadows. Max yanked it open, revealing an alleyway bathed in the pale light of a flickering street lamp. Without hesitation, he pulled her into the alley, and they ran down the narrow path, the cold air biting at their skin. Lily's mind was still racing, but she couldn't focus on the questions that flooded her thoughts. There was no time. Max was moving quickly, pulling her along like a lifeline. Every so often, she would hear a distant sound, the echo of footsteps or voices. Someone was following them. Suddenly, Max stopped dead in his tracks, his hand tightening around her wrist. "Get down," he hissed. Before she could react, he shoved her against the side of the building, pressing his body against hers to shield her from view. Lily's breath hitched in her throat as she tried to keep as quiet as possible. She strained to hear any sound, any sign that they were being pursued. The footsteps grew louder, and then they stopped, just a few feet away. Lily held her breath, her body tense with fear. "Where are they?" a deep voice asked from the shadows. The tone was menacing, low. "They're gone," another voice answered. "We lost them." Lily's stomach turned, but she dared not move. She had no idea who these people were, but it was clear they meant business. And Max's words rang in her mind. "You've got enemies, people who will stop at nothing to get what they want." The footsteps retreated, and Max finally exhaled, his grip on her wrist loosening. He pulled her out from the side of the building, his eyes scanning the street before looking back at her. His face was pale, the usual bravado gone, replaced by a look of grim determination. "They're not going to stop," Max said, his voice steady now. "They'll keep coming until they get what they want." Lily stared at him, her heart racing. What do they want? And why me? Max looked at her, his expression unreadable. I don't know, Lily. But whatever it is, it's bigger than anything we've dealt with before. You need to stay with me. You're safer that way. For a long moment, Lily stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The reality of what was happening was sinking in, and the fear that had been simmering inside her was beginning to bubble over. She didn't trust Max. Not fully. But she had no choice. She couldn't fight this alone. I'm not trusting you again, Lily said firmly, though the doubt gnawed at her. But I'll stay for now. I need answers, and I need to know what's really going on. Max nodded, his face hardening. Then let's get you to safety, and after that, we can figure out how to stop it. As they moved deeper into the night, the weight of what was to come settled over them both. This was no longer about their past, no longer about betrayal or hurt feelings. It was about survival. And in this dangerous new game, trust was a currency neither of them could afford. The judge's verdict. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a cold, silver light over the city streets as Lily and Max continued their hurried journey through the darkness. Every step felt like they were running from something. No, someone. Something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. They moved swiftly, avoiding the main roads, sticking to narrow alleys and side streets, all while keeping their heads low and their eyes peeled for danger. Max had been leading them toward a safe house, a place he claimed was secure, but Lily wasn't sure she could trust him. Everything had shifted in the past few hours, and her world was now a haze of confusion, fear, and betrayal. She had once thought she understood her life, her goals, her purpose, but now it felt like she was caught in a storm, fighting to stay afloat in a world that had turned upside down. As they moved deeper into the heart of the city, Max's hand kept a firm grip on her arm, as if afraid to let go. Despite his insistence that he was on her side, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that he still had his own agenda. There were too many unanswered questions, too many secrets he was keeping. She had to know the truth, but would he ever give it to her? We're almost there, Max said, his voice low and strained. Lily nodded but didn't speak. Her mind was spinning, the weight of everything bearing down on her. She hadn't expected any of this, not the betrayal, not the danger. It all felt like a twisted nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. They reached an old, dilapidated building tucked away in a quiet part of town, far removed from the bustling nightlife that had once been Lily's world. It was a stark contrast to the bright lights and glitzy clubs she had frequented just hours earlier. The building looked abandoned, its windows dark, and its walls cracked with age. Max led her through a rusted door at the back, and they entered a dimly lit corridor. The air inside was thick with dust, and the creaking of floorboards beneath their feet echoed through the empty halls. It felt like a forgotten place, hidden away from the rest of the world. This way, Max said, guiding her down the hallway. They stopped at a door halfway down the corridor. Max pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the door, revealing a small, sparse room. It was far from luxurious, but it was safe, at least for now. Lily stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The walls were bare except for a single peeling painting. There was a bed in the corner, an old wooden desk, and a chair. It looked like a room meant for hiding out, not living in. Max shut the door behind them and turned to face her. "Stay here," he said. "I'll go get you some food and supplies. You need to rest." Lily didn't respond right away. She was too lost in thought. Rest? How could she possibly rest when everything felt like it was crumbling around her? Max's eyes softened for a moment, and his hand brushed the back of her arm. "I know this is a lot to take in, but trust me, I'm trying to protect you." Lily stared at him, searching his face for any trace of the man she had once known, but all she saw was a stranger, a man who had lied to her, betrayed her, and dragged her into a world she didn't understand. "I don't trust you," she said softly, her voice laced with the anger and betrayal that had been building in her for weeks. "I don't know who you are anymore." Max flinched, as though her words had struck him deeply, but he didn't respond. He simply nodded and walked out of the room, leaving Lily to sit alone in the silence that followed. She slumped onto the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The weight of the day, of everything that had happened, pressed heavily on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The pieces of her life no longer fit together. The world she had known, the world she had worked so hard to build, had shattered in an instant, and the person who had been there by her side through it all, Max, was the one who had torn it apart. As she lay back, her thoughts began to swirl. What was happening? Why was she being hunted? And why had Max come back into her life at all? Her mind returned to the cryptic words he had said earlier. You've got enemies. Dangerous people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. Who were these people? What did they want from her? Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a text message. We know you're with him. Stay put. You're not safe. Lily's stomach dropped. She stared at the message, the words sending a chill through her body. Who was sending it? How did they know where she was? Her heart raced as she tried to steady her breathing. There was no way she could stay here now, not with someone watching her. She couldn't trust Max, and she certainly couldn't trust the people who were hunting her. She quickly grabbed her phone and sent a message back to the unknown sender. Who are you? What do you want from me? The response came almost instantly. You don't need to know, but you need to stay out of the way. This is bigger than you think. Lily felt the ground beneath her feet shift. She was no longer in control. This game had gotten too big, too dangerous. She didn't know who to trust anymore, and time was running out. Just then, the door to the room creaked open, and Max stepped inside, carrying a bag of supplies. He froze when he saw the look on her face. What's wrong? He asked, his eyes narrowing in concern. Lily didn't answer immediately. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she held her phone. She showed him the message. Max's expression darkened as he read the words. He glanced up at her, his face hardening. They're tracking you, he said, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. We need to move now. Lily's heart skipped a beat. Who are they? Why are they doing this? Max clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing. They're the same people who were watching us before. The ones I told you about. They're after something, Lily, and I don't know exactly what it is yet, but I do know this. If they get what they want, we're both done. Lily's mind raced. She had no time to think. Her world had been flipped upside down in the blink of an eye, and now it seemed like her past, present, and future were all being shaped by forces she couldn't comprehend. What do we do? She asked, her voice shaking. Max exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. We fight back. And just like that, everything changed. The fight for her life was no longer a question of surviving in silence. Now, it was a battle for control, of her fate, of the truth, and of the darkness that loomed on the horizon. Max wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was preparing her for war.